Now recognizes the gentleman from Arkansas, Mr. Hill, for 5 minutes.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Can anyone report to me on a transaction under a tribunal-type settlement, legal settlement, or in any other case where the United States government has made a payment in cash?
So there's no evidence of that. In fact, we found a 2015 tribunal settlement for $848,000 that was owed to Iran, and it seems to have been wire transferred. And so of the 4,000 tribunal settlements, we've seen no evidence that any of those tribunal settlements were paid in cash.
Further, in your testimony, since the JCPOA has been put in place and sanctions lifted, you cited the government of Japan wiring money to Tehran, as I presumed is a part of the freed frozen accounts. So there's been evidence of swift wire transfers since the completion of the JCPOA. Is that your general understanding?
Congressman, in fact, not only since the completion of the JCPOA, but since the completion of the interim agreement. And Mr. Backermeyer seems to suggest that there was a financial embargo on Iran, and that's the reason that we couldn't send electronic funds. But the reality is that Iranian banks remained on SWIFT, even at the height of sanctions. As Mr. Lorber says, there's a humanitarian channel where over 3,000 humanitarian transactions were settled every year. We gave the Iranians access to $11.9 billion, and $700 million a month was sent from the Bank of Japan and other banks to these accounts that Iran could use. And that's really the heart of my testimony, which is the administration is trying to have it both ways. Either there is a financial embargo, which is why they had to send $1.7 billion in cash. If that's the case, then they've sent many billions of dollars in cash, including the $11.9 billion and the $20 billion that they admit to repatriating. Or there is no financial embargo. It's just difficult, but there are other ways to actually send the money besides cash, and they use cash in this case because it was an Iranian demand. The administration can't have it both ways.
It seems to me that there's no legal basis for cash other than the request of the negotiating party that they sought cash. So I think that's what we've heard both from the government witnesses today and from our private sector panel. Mr. Lower, you talk about this idea of Iran certifying that the funds aren't used for terrorism. You used a couple of examples. To me, that was one of the biggest weaknesses in sanctions relief under the JCPOA because it was a cliff vesting. They hold their money held frozen abroad back immediately with no ability to let it out over time if they maintain compliance with this agreement. I'm not sure your whitelist idea would hold a lot of clout with me because I'm not sure we know what goes on inside Iran. But this idea that we let money out over time and we have Iran certify a pledge to the payment that it be certified not be used for terrorism might be useful. Have we used that in any settlement before, that kind of settlement over time basis with certifications from the recipient?
I'm not familiar with any circumstance, particularly in the Iranian case, where we've used this sort of tranched approach with intermediate certification. But I agree that it would be a way to at least ensure that there could be some limitations. And indeed, we proposed this in other contexts as well before this committee. Mr. Dubowitz and I both suggested something along these lines when structuring the Boeing and Airbus deal to Iran as a way to structure those contracts.
If I may, sir, the PLACA legislation required that there be regular certification, I believe biannual, that none of the monies which are given to the Palestinian Authority or the Palestinian Liberation Organization are used for terrorism. So there is precedent in which such certifications can occur.
Thank you. That's helpful. Can you think of any legitimate justification why in January, in the 17 January announcement by the administration about the release of our hostages, our American citizens, which we're all thrilled to have back. We want Robert Levinson back as well. We need to keep that pressure up. And the decision about this claims settlement matter. Can you think of any legitimate justification why the administration kept the fact that they paid all this money in cash secret from the American people? What would be the basis for that?
Well, I think there are two reasons. One is the concerns that everybody's raising about how cash used by money launderers and terror financiers. Yeah. I think the second reason is I think the administration is loath to admit that they may have transferred many billions of dollars to Iran. And then we're just talking about 1.7, but we're talking all of that money that's on the screen there. Some or all of the 33.6 billion. If they had admitted that it was cash, Congress would then rightly be asking questions about all the other money that Iran has repatriated over the past 3 years. And then you would be very concerned that it's perhaps billions, if not tens of billions, that the Iranians have gotten in cash to finance not only terrorism, but to support their military, to support Bashar Assad, and all the other malign activities.
Thank you. I want to conclude, Mr. Chairman, by reading from the distinguished former member of the Senate, Joseph Lieberman, in his op-ed today in the Wall Street Journal. On the 15th anniversary of 9/11, the United States should not be rewarding Iran for its deadly actions with gifts of sanctions relief and the easing of arms embargoes and ballistic missile restrictions. It is time to hold the regime accountable for its reckless aggression and support of terrorism. I yield back.
The gentleman yields.